The sorting room is still cold enough that the metal hand stamp feels heavier than it should when you first lift it from the bench. Somewhere beyond the wall, a railway cart rattles over cobbles, and inside, the air carries paper dust, twine fibers, and the faint, oily smell of ink. It is early in the Weimar years, before the parcel counter has fully woken, and your part of the morning is already waiting in small, exact tasks. You straighten labels, test the ink pad with a careful press, set the scale to level, and open the ledger to a page ruled for other people's goods. Most of the work is not difficult, only narrow and precise. The kind that asks for the same motion again and again. A parcel comes forward, then another, each wrapped in brown paper tied with string and marked by hands you will never meet. Your job is to notice what is slightly off, the weak knot, the blurred district name, the old surcharge mark still clinging to a new label. And because this is parcel post and Berlin, and a year when rules seem to age by the week, even an ordinary bundle can slow the whole bench. So tonight, in this quiet corner of the postal system, we can take our time with the forgotten work of the stamper and the careful marks that kept everything moving. The first sack of the morning is ordinary enough, and that is a comfort. A baker's flour samples, wrapped square and plain, a pair of boots going out to a cousin in Spandau, a small wooden crate with brass fittings, declared as watch parts, though the sender's hand is hurried and leaves the last word looking softer than it should. You weigh, compare, stamp, and slide each one onward. The motion settles into you quickly. Left hand on the parcel, right hand on the stamp, a glance to the rate table pinned beside the cage, a press into ink, a firm descent, then the small turn of the wrist that leaves the mark level and dark. By this hour, the senior clerks don't speak much. They save their voices for questions that matter. The room is made of quieter sounds instead. String scraping wood, a pen nib catching for an instant on rough paper, the soft thud of parcels set down in a line, and from the far window, where the glass is clouded by dust and winter breath, a strip of pale light that touches the edge of your ledger. Then the unusual bundle arrives. It comes not from the public counter, but from the inward sorting side, carried under one arm by a railway messenger with red ears and damp cuffs. He sets down 6 parcels together, all bound for different districts, yet tied with the same grey twine and marked in the same narrow hand. That alone is not strange. Many shops send in batches before opening. What makes the senior clerk lift his head is the labels. 2 still bear old imperial eagle forms beneath newer pasted strips. One has a surcharge hand stamp struck in violet, then crossed through in pencil. Another carries a district slip that names the wrong depot entirely. And on the smallest bundle, where the paper has buckled at one corner, the value declaration is written twice, once in black ink and once again in blue. You don't need to be told to stop the ordinary flow. You place the 6 doubtful parcels to the side of your board and keep your fingers resting lightly on the topmost one. The paper is cool. The twine is pulled too tight across one face and too loose across another. A weak wrapping often tells a longer story. The supervising clerk steps over, buttoning his cuffs as he comes. He is not an unkind man, though he has the tired patience of someone who has already corrected the same mistake many times this month. He bends over the parcels without touching them, reading the labels with his face close. Then he asks for the latest circular. That request changes the morning at once. The circular is kept folded in the drawer beneath the registry forms, and when you lift it out you can smell the fresh paste of the notice strip added only 3 days earlier. Postal rates have changed again. Not all at once, and not cleanly. A base charge revised here, a distant supplement altered there, extra fees added for declared value, with old forms still in use because no office can throw away paper as fast as instructions arrive. The supervising clerk reads in silence. The railway messenger waits. No one likes a waiting messenger because his delay becomes everyone else's delay by the time carts and sacks begin to move. At last, the clerk taps the second parcel with one fingernail. These cannot sit for inquiry, he says. Too much through traffic this morning. He says it softly, but it is still a decision. If the parcels are held back, they miss the first dispatch. If they are returned to the counter, a sender may not be found before noon. If they are processed wrongly, the mistake travels with them. He looks at you then, and not at the older man 2 benches down. That is how you understand the task has become yours. Process them by hand, he says. Special notation on each line. Anything doubtful, bring to me before the strike. He does not need to explain which strike. There are several stamps on the bench, each with its own purpose and its own shape of authority. A date stamp says when. A district stamp says where. A deficiency mark says not enough. And each impression settles something that handwriting alone leaves open. You pull the first parcel close and begin with the wrapping. This is always the first truth of parcel work. Before rates and routes, before fees and ledgers, there is the parcel itself. If the paper is split, if the knot slips, if sealing wax is broken, every later decision grows worse. The first bundle is sound enough, brown paper, reused from a warehouse wrapper, folded neatly at the corners. String doubled under the base, addressed to Charlottenburg, weight just under 3 kilograms. The old eagle form is still visible beneath the pasted label, but the new address strip is clear. The surcharge mark, though faint, belongs to a circular already replaced. That means the fee may be wrong, but the item is not lost. You compare the written amount to the table, running your finger down the columns. Local zone, not local, rail supplement, declared value none. The sender has underpaid by a small amount, but only if the latest adjustment is enforced from the date named in the newest notice, rather than from the date posted in the older district office. That is the sort of thing no customer sees. To the sender, it is one parcel. To the bench, it is a question of whether one instruction reached one wall before another. You call the supervising clerk over. He reads the line, glances at the notice, and makes another choice. Accept underpaid with intolerance, he says. Mark manuscript correction. Move it. So you write the deficiency beside the entry in a narrow hand. Then add the hand stamp beside it, careful not to strike over the address. The sound is dull and satisfying. Not loud, just enough to say that a decision has taken shape. The second parcel is less forgiving. It is longer than the first, wrapped around something rigid and narrow, perhaps a metal component or a stack of ruled forms. The district slip says Newcull. The pasted redirection strip says otherwise again, now naming a receiving station across the city that no longer handles that route under this week's arrangement. 3 directions on one parcel is more than paper untidiness. It means any one clerk along the line could send it somewhere different. You check the sender's hand against the rest of the batch. The same writer? Yes. The same grey twine? Yes. The same habit of making capital letters tall and cramped. A shop runner has likely prepared all 6 at once, using what labels were left in a drawer. That would be ordinary enough in another year, but in these years, ordinary habits turn into postal puzzles. The senior clerk studies the parcel and asks where the inward messenger received the batch. From a cart at the side entrance comes the answer. No receipt questioned. Sent over from a commercial quarter office before dawn. That matters because side entrance parcels have already crossed one threshold of acceptance. If Berlin parcel traffic stopped to untangle every inherited confusion, half the benches in the city would do nothing else. So the clerk chooses again. Use the written address over the old slip, he says. Cross the obsolete routing. Add district notation by hand. The parcel is not to be opened. This choice is practical, and it is also a little brave. A clerk who follows paper literally can defend himself with paper later. A clerk who interprets must rely on judgment, and judgment leaves room for blame. Still, the bench cannot run on fear of tomorrow's inquiry. You draw one straight line through the old district slip. Not angry. Not messy. A line neat enough that any later clerk can still read what was rejected. Then you write the corrected depot in the margin and add the district stamp below. For a moment the parcel looks overburdened with marks, as if it has passed through too many hands already. But that is the hidden beauty of postal work in unsettled years. The more uncertain the path, the more necessary a clear mark becomes. The third and fourth parcels follow with their own smaller troubles. One is overweight by a margin so narrow that the scale must be checked twice. You lift the little brass counterweight, settle it back, and breathe once before reading again. Still overweight. That means a new rate line, a supplement added, a notation in the ledger. The sender has tied the paper beautifully, but beauty does not make a parcel lighter. The next parcel has no true fault in postage at all, only an address blurred where a wet sleeve or damp crate must have brushed against the ink. You tilt it toward the window, the surname returns first, then the street, then the number, faint but there. You stamp it with almost exaggerated care because a smudged address and a crooked mark together can turn legible into doubtful. By now, the ordinary line behind your special pile has begun to lengthen. Another clerk takes two of your routine parcels to ease the pressure. No one complains. That is how these rooms handle strain when they are working well. Not with speeches, just with the parcel lifted from one board to another and a small nod to say, the balance has shifted. Yet the 6 parcels still hold the eye. The 5th is the one that changes the shape of the morning more plainly. It is the smallest, wrapped in stiff paper around a box no larger than a loaf. The declared value has been entered twice, once in black ink and again in blue, as if corrected after argument. There is sealing wax on one corner, but not across the twine, which means the seal proves less than it appears to prove. And when you compare the written postage to the table, the amount fits neither the old tariff nor the latest one. That leaves only 2 possibilities. Either another office used a temporary local instruction not copied here yet, or someone has guessed. Postal systems are full of educated guesses made under poor light. Some are harmless. Some delay a train bag. You call the supervising clerk again. He presses the parcel lightly at the edges, feeling for loose interior papers. Then he asks for the commercial register book. Because declared value parcels are treated more carefully than ordinary goods, the register book is thicker than the morning ledger and smells faintly of glue. As he turns the pages, a customer bell rings somewhere in front, and another sack is dragged across the floor behind you. The room is waking now. Cold first, then noise, then the steady occupation of every bench. He finds the sender's name after a moment, a machine goods wholesaler, not large enough to have its own postal liaison, but regular enough to be known. That tips his decision toward movement rather than rejection. Mark value disputed, he says. Hold fee for destination collection if needed. Again, a practical answer. Again, one that shifts a little burden forward down the line. But parcel post survives on such shifts. No one office can solve everything. Sometimes the best service is not perfect certainty, but a clear enough record that the next clerk can continue. You make the special notation in the ledger, and this time your pen scratches harder than before. It matters where each mark sits. Too close to the sender's name, and it looks like part of the declaration. Too far to the margin, and another office may miss it. The stamp follows, square and dark. You block the edge with a scrap of waste paper. Then you place the parcel into a separate tray for conditional dispatch. The 6th and last parcel should have been the easiest. Its wrapping is decent, its destination clear, its weight exact. But when you lift it, one side gives slightly, and you hear a soft internal slide. Not broken, perhaps, only badly packed. Still, parcels that shift can tear their own wrappers from within, especially on rail journeys where sacks are stacked, dropped, and dragged. The rules allow refusal for insecure packing. They also allow acceptance if reinforcement is added before dispatch. The problem is time. The first outbound cart will be loaded soon. Twine reinforcement means sending the bundle to the packing table, waiting for the porter, and losing your place in the hand processing of the batch. For a brief moment, the decision is yours to frame. You could reject it upward and protect yourself. You could send it on and trust the paper, or you could ask for reinforcement now and slow the line. The supervising clerk is already occupied at the adjacent bench. answering a dispute over printed matter rates. So you do what junior workers in old systems often had to do. You judge. You test the paper again at the corners. You press once near the label, once near the seam. The movement inside is slight, not violent. Probably folded textiles or papers in a box a little too large. Not metal. Not glass. You take fresh twine from the spool, loop it under the parcel, and cinch one cross tie yourself. It is not elegant. It is enough. When the clerk glances over, you explain in 3 words. He nods once. That nod enters the record nowhere, but it is part of the real history of the bench. By the time the 6 parcels are entered, marked, and sorted into their proper channels, the room has changed around you. The pale strip of light on the ledger has widened. The far stove has begun to warm the damp from coats hanging by the back wall. At the public counter beyond the partition, voices rise and soften in the usual pattern of morning business. A woman asking if preserves can travel without special paper. A boy sent from a tailor with 2 bundles and not quite enough coins. A manufacturer's clerk insisting his district was charged differently last week, which may even be true. On your bench, though, the effect of the doubtful batch lingers. Because those 6 could not simply be stamped and slid onward, the pile behind them is now taller, because each one required a decision. The supervising clerk has stayed close instead of moving to registry checks. Because he stayed close, another bench has borrowed one of his forms, and now someone is searching for a replacement sheet that should have been in the second drawer. Small delays never remain small for long. That is one of the quiet lessons of sorting work. You don't need a catastrophe to change a room. Just one bundle with old labels, one circular not yet fully absorbed, one morning in which every rule has a shadow of the rule before it. The next sack opened beside you confirms it. Mixed franking again. Not as tangled as the first batch, but close enough to make everyone a little slower. A parcel to Potsdam with stamps from 2 issues. A crate of hardware bearing last month's surcharge in purple and this week's fee in black pencil. A broadcloth package whose sender has written express service on the label, even though the district no longer accepts that wording for parcel treatment. The senior clerk exhales through his nose and pulls the latest notices into a stack beside his elbow. There will be no clean return to routine this morning. Not now. Not after the first doubtful bundle has shown what kind of day it is. So the bench changes its method. That too happens without announcement. One tray is set aside for acceptable underpayment, another for manuscript correction. A third, smaller and more worrisome, for parcels that may require destination collection or special notation on receipt. What was a simple stamping position an hour ago begins to feel like a place of practical authority. Not grand authority, nothing anyone outside would notice, but enough that your hand, bringing the stamp down squarely on paper, now decides whether a shop receives parts by afternoon or waits another day. You become aware of this, not all at once, but in little flashes. One comes when a messenger from the front counter lays down a parcel franked in stamps so mixed that the colors look almost decorative until you start counting them. The labels are neat enough, the twine is fresh, the address is clear. And yet the postage has been built from old denominations, emergency surcharges, and one overprinted value that belongs to a rate circular no longer posted on your wall. You do not sigh. No one here wastes breath on surprise. You simply draw the parcel toward you, flatten the label with your fingertips, and begin the quiet arithmetic again. That arithmetic is the true second half of the morning. People like to imagine postal work as bags moving, wheels turning, whistles sounding, all the grand machinery of distance. But most of it, at bench height, is slower than that. It is eyes moving from one line to another. It is a finger traveling down a printed table. It is the little pause before a clerk decides whether a doubtful mark can still be allowed to stand. In these Weimar years, with money changing value so fast that yesterday's certainty can become today's shortage, parcel post suffers in a particular way. A letter can be light, a postcard can be simple. A parcel is never simple. A parcel has weight. A parcel has distance. A parcel may have declared value, registration, urgent treatment, fragile wrapping, railway connection, and a sender who has tried very hard to use whatever stamps still remained in a drawer. All those things have to agree. They have to agree on the wrapper. They have to agree in the ledger. They have to agree with the current tariff, or at least with some recent version of it that another office will recognize. If they do not agree, then your bench becomes the place where the disagreement is softened into something usable. The mixed franked parcel is from a stationery dealer. You can tell from the return mark and from the shape. Flat, but not too flat. Stiff, but not wooden. Probably printed forms or account books tied in bundles. The written amount comes close to the proper rate, but not close enough to pass without comment. There is a deficiency. Small in coin and large in consequence. Too small to justify throwing the parcel back into the city. Too large to ignore if the receiving office bothers to compare every figure. So you place it in the first tray, the one for acceptable underpayment, and add a narrow manuscript note under the rate line. The act is simple. The meaning is larger. By doing so, you are saying that movement is better than purity. That a parcel, slightly wrong but plainly traceable, should continue onward. That is not written in big letters anywhere. It lives in rooms like this, in the habits of clerks who know that a city cannot stop every time paper falls behind practice. Another parcel follows from a druggist's runner. This one has a declared value and a distance supplement, but the value figure on the front differs from the one in the accompanying receipt stub. The runner is young, with ink on his thumb, and impatience in every shift of his shoes. He says the proprietor wrote it in haste. He says the goods are expected by evening. He says another office accepted such forms yesterday. That may all be true. Still, the figures do not match. When declared value enters a parcel, the parcel changes character. Ordinary bundles can be forgiven a little roughness. Valuable goods require a cleaner path. You ask the runner to wait. He dislikes that at once, though he tries not to show it. Waiting is a kind of tax no one likes to pay. The supervising clerk checks the stub, then the wrapper, then the latest notice. He does not look at the runner until he is finished. Correct to the lower declared amount, he says. Collect deficiency if questioned at destination. Then he adds, almost to himself, that if head office wanted perfect forms, head office might try printing and distributing them before changing the fees. That is as close to complaint as he usually comes. The runner leaves relieved. The parcel stays with you another minute while the note dries. You notice that the string has been tied in a tradesman's knot, fast and practiced, not decorative. You notice the paper has a medicinal smell, faint even through the wrapper. You notice, too, that if the values had differed by more, the whole thing would have gone into the cage, but they did not, and so another compromise enters the stream of the day. By late morning, the trays begin to tell their own story. Ordinary parcels still pass through in a steady line. Boot leather, sample cloth, machine screws. Glassware packed with enough straw to make the scales itch your hands. But beside that ordinary line now sit the doubtful piles, each small, each growing. Underpaid but acceptable, corrected by hand, hold for destination collection. Set aside for supervisor, they are not dramatic piles. No mountain of sacks, no shouted crisis, just shallow trays on a scarred wooden bench. Yet they change the room. Each tray means more reading, more glances at the circular, more opportunities for one office's judgment to become another office's inconvenience. A postal system, when looked at from a distance, seems made of trains and buildings. From close-up, it is made of trays. It is made of little temporary categories that keep uncertainty from spilling everywhere at once. The senior clerk understands this, and around the middle of the morning he adds, one more adjustment. A sheet of waste cardboard is folded into a divider and set between your inkwell and the stamp rack. On one side, parcels that can still leave with the next dispatch. On the other, parcels that need a second pair of eyes before noon. He does this without announcement. You understand it immediately. The room is improvising. Not wildly, not carelessly, in the measured way Old institutions improvise when they have been forced to do so many times before. At the next bench, an older clerk named Bauer, who usually handles registry work and complains only in silence, begins calling out circular dates from memory as you check labels. The 12th of October, superseded. The 17th of October, still valid for provincial zones, maybe not for Berlin district treatment. The 21st of October. Look for the addendum strip. He says these things in a flat voice, never lifting his head much from his own entries. You answer with weights, destinations, or the occasional request for confirmation. Together you build a temporary bridge across paperwork that has aged too quickly. This is how many systems survive their awkward years. Not by elegance, by memory. By two clerks sharing enough half-remembered instructions to keep the sacks moving. A messenger from the railway side brings more through traffic. These parcels are always a little different. Less conversation from the sender, more inherited confusion. Some were accepted in other towns or smaller Berlin offices and have already gained marks before reaching this room. One bears a cancellation from an office that still uses a hand stamp style your bench replaced months ago. Another has fee calculations in thick purple pencil, likely done on a counter with no proper rate board in sight. A third arrives with a tag tied to the string rather than pasted to the wrapper because the original paper split and someone along the way decided repair was faster than rewriting. That sort of repair is technically improper. It is also deeply familiar. You handle these through parcels with more respect than annoyance. They carry the fingerprints of the whole network. Every bad strike, every crooked label, every hurried notation is evidence that elsewhere, in another room with another stove and another wall calendar, someone made the same kind of practical decision you are making here. At times you can almost read the route through style alone. A district office with neat violet deficiency marks. A rail exchange point that favors blunt pencil corrections. A commercial substation that stacks stamps too closely because its counter is narrow and its clerks work shoulder to shoulder. No one writes these traits into official guides. Still, bench workers know them, just as they know when paper has sat in damp air too long, or when a parcel has been retied by somebody other than the sender. The day keeps teaching the same lesson. Rules exist, circulars arrive, devices are issued. But the living system is carried by people who recognize one another's habits through paper. A little before noon, the case with the machine parts arrives. At first, it does not announce itself as important. It is simply one more set of parcels from the inward side, 3 long boxes, and a flatter crate wrapped in heavy paper reinforced at the edges with linen tape. The sender's mark belongs to a small workshop, not a giant concern, somewhere in the city where machinists and repairmen rent narrow floors behind courtyards. The addresses are all for the same receiving station outside Berlin. The writing is competent, the wrapping is better than average, and yet each parcel carries a rate assessment that makes your attention stop. The fee is wrong in a very specific way, not chaotic, not guessed, obsolete. You have seen this pattern before, though not all morning. It belongs to a tariff line replaced recently enough that old habits still produce it. A workshop clerk has almost certainly copied from an older chart hanging near a dispatch desk. Under other conditions, the correction would be easy. Deficiency mark, ledger note, send onward. But these parcels carry an attached inquiry slip from the receiving station. A telegram has already been sent asking why the shipment has not arrived. That changes the atmosphere at once. Not because anyone grows dramatic, no one does, but because an inquiry means the parcels have already become visible. They are no longer just paper and twine, they are now a missing expectation at the other end of a rail line. The supervising clerk reads the inquiry twice. Bauer turns his head for the first time in 10 minutes. Even the porter at the bagging table glances over before returning to his knots. The workshop parcels were accepted under an old tariff. They reached some intermediate point. They were delayed, likely for reassessment. Now they have landed here with a telegraphed question attached, and the answer must become a mark on paper before the next dispatch closes. You compare the old assessment to the current rate. The deficiency is clear. Not ruinous, but enough that strict treatment would justify rejection or return for correction. The workshop would then lose another day, perhaps more. The receiving station would note delay. The inquiry would become a complaint. The paper trail would widen, or the parcels could be accepted under corrective deficiency to be collected on delivery. That path is also allowed, but less clean. It means the receiving office must trust your notation. It means the recipient must pay. It means your bench's judgment travels ahead of the parcels and asks strangers to honor it. The supervising clerk considers all this quietly. He rubs one thumb along the edge of the inquiry slip, feeling the rough telegraph paper. Then he asks for the document pouches to be checked. One of the long boxes has an outer envelope tied beneath the string. Inside is a dispatch note naming parts for a milling machine repair. That detail matters more than it should. Not because machine parts are sacred, but because repair parts delayed can idle labor elsewhere. Postal workers are not supposed to rank customers by sympathy. Still, everyone understands the practical chain. A workshop waits for parts. Men wait for the workshop. Invoices wait for the goods to arrive. When the clerk speaks, his voice is low enough that the room does not need to stop for it. Open for document verification only, he says. Not the goods. Just the papers. Apply box deficiency. Collect on delivery. It is a measured decision, also an irreversible one. Once the parcels are notated and sent, the receiving office will treat them according to your marks, unless some later clerk chooses to challenge the whole thing. Most do not. The network is too busy for philosophical objections, so the parcels are carried to the inspection end of the bench, where opening can be done under witness. This is a different kind of work from stamping, and because it is different, the room grows more attentive to small motions. The string is lifted carefully, not cut unless necessary. The outer wrapper is folded back only enough to reach the document pouch. The contents are not disturbed. A witness initial goes in the margin. A note is entered stating document verification only. No examination of goods. Then the paper is brought back together, the string retied, and sealing strips added where the disturbance occurred. Your part returns when the wrapper is ready again. The boxed deficiency hand stamp sits in the lower rack, not as heavy as the date stamp, but heavier than it looks. It has one clear job, to tell the next office that something is owed. You test it once on waste paper. The impression is good. Then you ink it again and bring it down on the first parcel. The mark lands just below the address, dark, square, undeniable. The second parcel receives the same, then the third, then the flatter crate. For each one, you add a ledger line noting deficient postage to be collected on delivery under corrective acceptance. The phrase is longer than the movement that sends the parcel away. That is often the balance in clerical work. The hand moves quickly. The wording lingers. As you write, you become aware of a strange shift. Until now, the morning's doubtful parcels have mostly been small confusions, mixed stamps, blurred addresses, old labels surviving beneath new paper. This case is different. These parcels are not just uncertain. They are contested by time, accepted under one rule, delayed under another, needed by people already asking where they are. And the answer for this moment is your bench. If anyone later studies the route, they will find your deficiency mark. They will see the Berlin notation. They will read the ledger timing beside the dispatch number. A routine tool has become a kind of evidence. Not evidence in a courtroom sense. Nothing so grand. Evidence of how things were actually made to work when forms and reality no longer matched perfectly. There is a curious calm in that realization. A little weight in the chest, yes, but also calm, because bench work does not give you time for abstract worry. The next parcel is already waiting, and then the next. Still, the machine parts remain in the edge of your mind after they are moved to the dispatch side. You imagine them traveling out under the day's judgments, carrying not just metal parts, but a small burden of explanation. At destination, a clerk will read the boxed mark, a recipient will grumble at the collected deficiency perhaps, a receipt will be signed, the workshop will get its repair pieces. And no one there will know that the difference between movement and stalling came down to a few quiet minutes in Berlin while ink dried on your board. That is how most important small work happens. Not noticed where it begins, only felt where delay did not occur. The noon hour approaches without any true break. In offices like this, noon is less a stopping point than a change in texture. The first rush has passed. The cold has lifted from the walls. The smell of wool coats gives way to warmed paper, stove metal, and the more settled scent of ink. Some clerks eat in turns. A heel of bread, a slice of sausage wrapped in yesterday's paper, coffee from a bottle if they are fortunate, or weak tea gone lukewarm by the time they remember it. You eat standing at the end of the bench, not wanting to leave the trays unattended, while the doubtful pile still sits higher than anyone likes. The bread tastes faintly of flour dust from your own fingers. That too feels ordinary. Across from you, Bauer finally speaks in a way that is not just procedural. He says that in his first years before the war, a parcel could sit under one tariff long enough for a clerk to memorize it properly. Now, he says, one might as well memorize weather. He is not trying to be clever, only tired. You ask whether parcel work was simpler then. He chews before answering. No, he says, only slower in a more reliable way. That is a useful distinction. People often imagine the past as steady because it is distant, but old workplaces were full of adjustments, exceptions, and human patches. The difference here is speed. Change has outrun paper. That is what gives the day its strange pressure, not catastrophe. Acceleration, too many circulars, too many denominations, too many forms trying to live past the week they were printed. After bread, the room returns to motion with the resigned efficiency of people who know there will be no rescuing the day from itself, only carrying it onward. The underpaid tray has grown large enough that the supervising clerk orders a secondary ledger sheet opened for supplementary fees. This creates fresh work immediately. Every parcel already marked must now be cross-referenced by dispatch line, not simply by sender and destination. You copy the first few entries carefully, making sure the line numbers agree. A mismatch now would create questions later. Questions later are worse than work now. That is another bench truth. The cage behind the sorting boards begins to fill. It is not truly a cage in the theatrical sense, only a gated holding section with shelves where doubtful parcels wait if they cannot lawfully proceed. Still, the bars cast a particular kind of message over anything placed there. Not lost, not accepted, suspended. You carry 3 parcels to it in the early afternoon. One lacks a complete sender address, which means return may become impossible if delivery fails. One is wrapped in such weak reused paper that even reinforced string would not save it on a rail transfer. One shows signs of tampering around the seal, enough that witness inspection must be arranged. The sound of the gate latch closing after each placement is small and final, more final than any stamp. A parcel in the cage has fallen out of the rhythm of the system. To restore it, someone must do more than mark. They must investigate. That hidden labor, the labor of stabilizing disorder, is where your day now bends. A woman from the inquiry side brings over 2 district guides, thick with inserted corrections, because one of the held parcels may have been routed under an office name no longer in current use. You had thought your work was hand motion and rate figures. Instead, it becomes reading old geography through modern confusion. Streets renamed, depots reorganized, boundary notes added in strips and pasted over previous strips. One can feel a city changing inside these guides, one pasted correction at a time. The parcel in question is addressed to a workshop yard known locally by one district, formally by another, and in the railway schedule by a third variation left over from an earlier arrangement. No sender in a hurry could be expected to know all that, yet your bench must turn that uncertainty into one destination. You compare the yard name with the old district map. Bauer checks the railway table. The supervising clerk reads the latest note from the wall. At last the address is resolved not by one clear answer, but by overlap. 3 imperfect references leaning toward the same station. That is enough. You write the accepted routing in the margin and add a note to disregard obsolete district wording. Once more, movement wins over elegance. The parcel leaves the cage. There is a quiet pleasure in that. Not triumph, just release. Something out of order has been given a path again. You begin to notice how much of parcel work depends on noticing materials before they fail. Paper tells on itself. A wrapper folded too sharply at the corner may split by evening. Twine with tiny flattened fibers has likely been pulled and retied already. Sealing wax can shine firm and trustworthy, or it can sit on the paper like decoration, proving almost nothing. Ink gives clues too. Fresh black writing over faded violet suggests a correction made at the counter. Blue pencil under a stamp indicates sorting room intervention. A date strike half over a pasted strip tells you the label was added before acceptance. A date strike clear beneath the edge of a correction strip means the parcel's story changed after entry. These are not mysteries in the detective sense. No one gasps over them. They are just the readable wear of a working network, and reading them is part of the craft. A new problem comes with a cloth-wrapped parcel bound for a provincial town. The wrapper is fine, the postage is nearly correct. The trouble sits instead in the address line, where the town name is plain, but the station mark has been amended twice. The first correction is in purple pencil, thick and blunt. The second is in finer black ink, written over the purple in a hand that tries to look official and only manages to look hurried. You hold the parcel closer to the window. The cloth wrapper smells faintly of soap and warehouse dust. Beneath the string, one corner is padded with folded card, a careful sender's touch, the kind that suggests shirts, linens, or maybe stitched sample pieces for a provincial merchant. On a simpler morning, you might have trusted the latest correction and sent it on. But the district guide for that town was one of the pages amended last week, and the railway routes no longer meet exactly where they did before. So you compare the destination against the new station list, then against the old page still tucked underneath, then against the sender's notation on the reverse. Each source agrees with itself. They do not agree with each other. That is the sort of disagreement that looks small on paper and grows large in travel. A parcel sent to the wrong provincial station does not merely lose an hour. It can miss a transfer, wait for the next sorting, acquire a fresh redirection mark, and return in 3 days looking as if no one wanted to claim it. You call Bauer over. He reads the name once, then again, with his lips pressed thin. He remembers, he says, that the old branch station closed to parcel handling at the start of the month, but he also remembers a temporary acceptance note for through traffic already in transit. Was this one already in transit when that note was issued, or accepted after it? The wrapper does not say. The date strike from the originating office is blurred where the cloth took ink badly. You tilt it. The month can be made out. The day cannot. That leaves a gap of only a few days, but those are exactly the days that matter. The supervising clerk comes, and this time he does not answer at once. He reaches into the drawer for the ministry circulars, then for the railway addenda, then finally for a stack of local notices tied with faded tape. Those local notices are the most revealing papers in the room. They are not elegant. They are not printed for permanence. Most are thin sheets, mimeographed or typed, with corrections added by hand in the margin. Yet they often contain the practical truth. A national rule says one thing, a district exception says another. A temporary rail notice says the opposite for 48 hours only. A system can look grand from above and still depend, at bench height, on papers no finer than this. At last he finds the note. There was, indeed, a temporary allowance. For parcels already accepted under the old branch station designation, routing through the central depot remained valid until the 22nd. After that, all incoming parcel traffic had to bear the new central station notation only. You all look again at the blurred date. It might be the 20th, it might be the 26th, it might be something in between, the cloth having swallowed the middle line of the numeral. The clerk sighs once softly. Then he says what the room has been learning all day. Recognizable intention over perfect wording. Route to the central depot. Note, obsolete station accepted under doubtful date. That way, if the receiving office objects, they object to a recorded uncertainty, not an invisible one. So you add another manuscript notation. The ink catches on the weave of the cloth, and you have to press more slowly than on paper. When you stamp beside it, the impression spreads at the edges, soft but legible. That is enough. The parcel goes onward. In another part of the city, the sender will assume the post has behaved as the post ought to behave. He will not picture the 3 men and 4 papers it took to decide one station name. That is proper enough. Work like this is built to disappear behind normal results. By the middle of the afternoon, the doubtful tray and the holding cage begin to feel like 2 halves of one occupation. The tray is the place of hoped-for movement. The cage is the place where movement has failed for the moment and must be repaired. Most people would think the stamping is the work. In truth, on a day like this, the real labor lies in stabilizing the things that have slipped just outside ordinary order. One by one, parcels come to you not because they are large or valuable, but because they no longer fit the easy flow. A box of valves with a sender's seal intact, yet a district number omitted. A bundle of catalogues so tightly wrapped the address strip has bent around a corner and hidden the town. A package of household metalware with proper franking and proper weight, but no visible line stating whether breakable contents are declared. None of these is dramatic. Each of them can still absorb 10 minutes, and 10 minutes, repeated enough times, can change the shape of a whole shift. The cage shelves tell their own story in layers. On the lower shelf rest the weekly wrapped parcels, waiting for repacking or refusal. Middle shelf, disputed charges and sender ambiguities. Upper shelf, the odd cases requiring witness attention or instruction from the front office or a reply from another station. You learn to read the day by where the empty spaces remain. When the middle shelf fills, it means rates and routes are causing trouble. When the lower shelf fills, senders are cutting corners with paper and twine. Today, the middle shelf is crowded. That feels right for the year. Money changing too fast, labels surviving too long, district arrangements shifting under older habits. The room is not fighting disorder so much as coaxing it into temporary neatness. A ledger runner from the inquiry side appears with a folded telegraph copy. He asks for the machine parts entries. You turn back through the supplementary sheet and find the lines. The receiving station's morning inquiry has been answered by your corrective acceptance, but now they want confirmation of the assessed efficiency amount before release to the consignee. That means your notation has already reached them in principle, even though the parcels themselves are likely still in transit. Paper outruns goods again. The runner waits while the supervising clerk checks your figures. No one says much. This is the sort of moment that makes the hand stamp feel heavier in memory. If the amount is wrong, the receiving office may collect too little or too much. Too little means an accounting mismatch later. Too much means complaint, correspondence, and perhaps a named inquiry into who made the assessment. The clerk compares current tariff line, weight line, corrective basis, and route class. Then he nods. You copy the deficiency amount onto the telegraph reply form. The runner leaves. Nothing visible changes in the room. Still, there is a subtle shift. The mark you placed an hour ago is now no longer just ink on wrapper and line in ledger. It has become a number transmitted to another office, a figure that affects a workshop you have never seen, and a clerk you will never meet. This is how narrow jobs become briefly central, not by prestige, by junction, by being the small place where several larger motions happen to cross. A little later, the audit clerk arrives. He does not make an entrance in the theatrical sense. He simply appears at the end of the row carrying a leather portfolio, his collar buttoned too tightly, his shoes cleaner than anyone else's in the room. Everyone knows what he is when they see the portfolio before the face. An internal audit clerk from district administration sent to compare live handling with the latest circulars. On some days, such visits are almost ceremonial. A few registers checked, a few signatures compared. A general reminder to maintain current forms. Today, his timing is less kind. The doubtful trays are visible. The supplementary fee sheet is open. 2 parcels still sit on the witness board awaiting final tying. Ink is drying on half the bench. He removes his gloves finger by finger and asks, in a voice neither warm nor cold, which circular date is being followed for parcel surcharges on mixed franked consignments accepted under old wrappers. No one answers immediately, not because the question is impossible, but because it has too many true answers. The supervising clerk steps forward and gives the practical one. The most recent district circular, where available, he says, with local tolerance for inherited forms already accepted into the stream. The auditor asks to see the circular. Then the addendum. Then the supplementary note. He reads with the absorbed, almost private concentration of a man who trusts paper more readily than recollection. There is nothing villainous about him. That is worth noticing. He is not a scold. He is not eager for punishment. He simply belongs to a part of administration where consistency on paper is itself considered a form of public order. From his desk, perhaps it is. From your bench, consistency is something pursued through imperfect tools and late notices. He begins checking live practice against the devices on your rack. The ordinary date stamp passes. The district mark passes. The box deficiency hand stamp causes him to pause. He lifts it gently, turning it in his fingers. This wording, he says, is not the newest approved phrasing for deficient postage on conditional parcel acceptance. The room goes a little quieter. You know at once what he means. The latest circular, issued but not yet fully implemented, recommends a revised wording to distinguish collection on delivery from parcels held for sender correction. Your office has the circular. It does not yet have the new device. That gap is ordinary in practice. On paper, it looks like disobedience. The supervising clerk says as much, in more respectful words. The new hand stamp has been requested, he says. Until delivery, the recognized older device is used to preserve continuity of handling by receiving officers. The auditor nods once, but does not let the point go. He asks whether receiving offices have been formally notified of continued use. The answer is less tidy. Some have through district notes. Some likely know by repetition. Some may infer it from context because everyone has lived with shortages and substitutions for long enough to develop that habit. Again, this is the true shape of the system, not ideal compliance. Recognizable continuity. The auditor asks to inspect several parcels from the doubtful tray. He chooses carefully. 1 mixed franked item. 1 manuscript corrected district rerouting. 1 of the machine parts consignments, not yet sealed into the evening dispatch sack. You place them before him. He examines the wrappers, then the corresponding ledger lines. He compares handwriting, strike placement, and wording. The process is slow and intimate. Nothing is dramatic. Still, every person at the nearby benches becomes aware of his own tools in a fresh way. The softness of an ink pad, the wear on a stamp face, the old wording on a reserve device. These things are mostly invisible until someone from outside asks whether they match the instruction precisely. The machine parts parcel occupies his attention longest. He reads the inquiry slip. He reads the witness notation for document verification. He reads your deficiency entry. Then he asks, who determined that corrective acceptance was preferable to formal rejection under obsolete tariff assessment? The supervising clerk answers at once. I did. The auditor glances at you, then back to him. And the bench entry? The junior stamper, he says, under instruction. That is true. It is also not the whole truth. Because your hand, your placement, your exact wording, your memory of the line sequence, all these matter now. You discover this when the auditor points to the impression itself. The stamp is slightly lower on the first parcel than on the second. The manuscript notation on one line is abbreviated, the other is written in full. Why, he asks, is the treatment not visually identical? The question sounds fussy at first hearing, yet it is not entirely unreasonable. Visual difference can suggest procedural difference to a later clerk. You answer carefully. The first impression was placed below the address to avoid obscuring the sender's declaration. The second parcel had more open space. The wording was expanded after the supervising clerk requested maximum clarity for destination collection. The auditor listens. He does not pounce. He asks whether that sequence can be verified. Now the room shifts into a more uncomfortable quiet. Because yes, it can be partly verified by timing in the ledger, by ink freshness, by the order of witness initials, by the telegraph copy already sent. But the cleanest confirmation is your own memory. That is when the day's repetitive labor changes shape entirely. The ordinary motions of the morning, which usually vanish into throughput, now become a kind of testimony. You are asked to reconstruct the route of the doubtful bundle and the machine parts from memory and record, not poetically, not broadly, simply. Which parcel came first? Which notation preceded which stamp? At what point the supervisor was consulted? Whether the reserve tray had yet been opened? Whether the inquiry slip arrived attached or separately? You answer each point as best you can. The details come more easily than you expect. This is the strange gift of repetitive work. Outsiders think it dulls memory. Often it sharpens a different kind. Not memory for speeches or spectacle, but for order, for sequence, for what lay to the left of what. For whether the blue pencil was already on the bench when the first doubtful parcel was entered. For whether the scale had been reset before the fourth item. Your mind has been tracing these patterns all day without announcing it. Now the auditor needs them. He asks about the opening of the machine parts parcel. Only documents examined? Yes. Goods undisturbed? Yes. Retied under witness? Yes. Special strip added where wrapper lifted? Yes. The witness initials confirm this, though one of the two is partly smudged. He compares the smudge, he checks the shelf sequence, then he writes something in his notebook. No one can see the exact wording. No one tries. There is a discipline to offices like this. Curiosity exists. Display does not. After another 10 minutes, he moves to the mixed franked parcel from the stationery dealer. Here again, the problem is not negligence. It is the gap between latest instruction and available materials. The overprinted denominations on the wrapper are legitimate, but belong to a circular already superseded. The latest supplement should, ideally, have been calculated using a revised fee note and a newer deficiency wording. The parcel has instead been accepted under old visual language with a manuscript correction. Perfect on paper? No. Legible to any competent clerk in the network? Yes. This is the argument your office now quietly makes. Movement depends on marks that are recognizable, even when they are not ideal. The auditor does not disagree outright. He merely keeps asking whether recognizable is enough where exact compliance is possible. The supervising clerk answers that exact compliance is not possible when devices and forms arrive later than the rules they are meant to enforce. Again, no heat. Just two definitions of order standing opposite each other over a wooden bench. The auditor then asks to see the reserve devices. The reserve rack is in the drawer beneath the blotter board. Most offices keep older hand stamps even after new ones are ordered, because iron tools outlast paperwork and because one never knows when a handle will split or a pad fail. You open the drawer. Inside lie the older district stamp, a worn date device with thinner numerals, and an even older deficiency mark whose wording belongs plainly to another tariff era. The auditor examines them. One of the handles has been repaired with wire. The worn date stamp still strikes clearly enough. The old deficiency mark is set aside as no longer fit for official use. He says this almost gently, as if speaking of an old clerk's eyesight. Then his hand rests on the reserve district cancellation. Has this one been used recently? The supervising clerk says no, not on current day's work. That answer is true for the moment. The reserve device has not yet become part of the story. That will come later. For now it remains only a possibility in a drawer. The inspection continues. He compares your ledger abbreviations against approved forms. One is outdated. Another is merely local shorthand. A third, he admits, is practical and unambiguous, though not prescribed. Piece by piece, the room learns what administration notices and what it overlooks. Not all deviations matter equally. A crooked strike that leaves wording clear may pass. A shorthand fee note that could be mistaken later does not. A missing witness initial matters more than an old pad. A recognizable obsolete hand stamp may be tolerated if the flow it preserves is obvious. In this way, the audit becomes less a scolding than a map of where theory meets wood and paper. For you, the experience has a peculiar effect. It does not make the work feel larger exactly. It makes it feel more legible. Every little habit on the bench has consequences someone can trace. Where you place a mark, how fully you write a note, whether a line in the ledger is cramped because the tray was full and your elbow had no room. Someone arriving from outside can read all this backward and call it procedure. For those doing it, it is simply the shape of the hour. At length, the auditor closes his notebook. He says the office is to request updated wording devices again, in writing. He says mixed franked parcels under emergency surcharges are to be entered with fuller notation until forms stabilize. He says corrective acceptance may continue where traffic demands it, provided witness lines and supplementary fees are exact. That last point lands softly, but it matters most. It is not full approval. It is not censure. It is the kind of administrative compromise that allows tomorrow to resemble today, only with a little more writing. When he leaves, carrying his portfolio back through the row of benches, no one relaxes dramatically. There is no laugh, no exchanged grin, only the small release of shoulders and the return of hands to tools. The room feels quieter after him, though not calmer. Quiet can sometimes mean concentration has gone deeper. You look at the parcels still waiting on the shelf and notice how much paper can seem to hold. String across folded corners, pasted labels over older forms, ink in different hands, different colors, different moments of certainty. All the day's uncertainty sits there physically, not abstractly. It sits in twine knots and margin notes. It sits in whether a district number is written above or below a line. The shelf by the cage seems almost to breathe with delayed decisions. And still the work goes on. A merchant's bundle with an incomplete sender line is restored when a faint business stamp emerges under angled light. A crate with a weak bottom is reinforced with slats and fresh wrapping strips at the packing end. A provincial parcel is released from hold after a return fee misunderstanding is clarified against an old local notice. Each solved case is small. Together they amount to the office making itself whole again, one narrow repair at a time. By late afternoon, the light through the windows has changed. Dust motes no longer show white. They show gold, then grey. The stove warmth has spread to the middle of the room, though the corners remain cool. On your fingers, the skin near the nails feels dry from paper and ink. The hand stamp handle has left a familiar pressure in the center of your palm. There is comfort in that pressure, not pleasure exactly. Recognition. You know what your hand has done all day. It has weighed, noted, pressed, and steadied. Bauer mutters that evenings are often cleaner than mornings, because by evening at least the confusion has sorted itself into categories. He is right in one sense. The trays are now more clearly divided. What can go, what can wait, what needs witness, what needs a written answer. But evening also brings another difficulty. Dispatch does not care how complex the day has been. At the appointed hour, sacks must be tied, route labels checked, and railway transfer made. If something essential is unsettled, then it is either postponed or forced into a form the next office can understand. That is where the remaining corrected parcels still matter. Several items from the morning's unusual bundle and 2 from the later doubtful tray require final district cancellation before they can enter sealed dispatch. Without it, the route is not formally closed. The district cancellation is not decorative. It tells the next room which authority last touched the parcel and under which local path it was made ready to travel. You reach for the rack where it should be, the movement so practiced that your fingers know the handle before your eyes confirm it. Your hand closes on air. For a second, the absence feels unreal. A tool used every hour becomes almost invisible by familiarity. Only when it is gone does the bench look altered, as if one board in the floor has shifted by half an inch. You check the rack again, then the blotter board, then the little square of stained felt where spare devices are sometimes set while ink is refreshed. Nothing. The supervising clerk notices your pause before he notices the cause. When you tell him, he does not react sharply. He only comes closer, looks at the empty space in the rack, and lays 2 fingers on the wood as if the stamp might return by being expected there. Around you, the room keeps moving for another half minute. Twine is tied. A ledger page turns. The porter lifts a mail sack to his shoulder. Then the news reaches the nearest benches in the small way office news always travels, not by announcement, but by the angle of one head turning toward another. The district cancellation is missing. Not stolen, most likely. Not dramatically misplaced. Just gone somewhere inside the day's labor, carried to another surface, set down beside another stack, hidden under a wrapper, or left near the bagging end when someone needed both hands free. Still, missing is missing. And with evening dispatch close, that matters more than anyone would like. The supervising clerk asks when you last used it. That is a reasonable question. On a bench like yours, memory is measured in sequences, not in clock minutes. You think back through the last parcels, the mixed franked cloth bundle, the corrected station rerouting, one of the machine parts consignments. No, that took only the box deficiency mark and ledger notation. Then 2 ordinary through parcels, then the audit clerk handling the reserve rack, then after the audit, yes. You remember striking the district cancellation on the narrow brown parcel from the morning bundle, the one with the obsolete routing slip crossed through neatly in a single line. After that, the device should have gone back to the rack. Should have. But the day has been made of should have. You begin searching the immediate bench first. That is the rule of any quiet emergency. Search small before large. The inkwell is lifted. The waste paper stack is shifted. Blotters are separated. Under the supplementary fee sheet, there is only a dark ring where the base of the bottle sat too long. Under the pad rack, only a broken match and a tuft of twine fiber. No stamp. At the next bench, Bauer stops writing and opens his drawer without being asked. He checks his rack, his spare tray, the shelf where questioned labels are sometimes laid aside. He finds an old date device, 2 sealing wafers, and a spoon someone must have left after noon tea. Nothing else. The porter checks the bagging table. The inquiry runner checks the witness board. Even the woman from the district guides returns to see whether the device was carried off of the circulars during the audit. No one raises a voice. That would waste time. Instead, the room becomes more deliberate. Hands move a little slower, eyes lower to every surface. A missing iron tool has a way of teaching everyone exactly how many places an object can travel in one long shift. You retrace the physical choreography of the day. That is the only phrase for it. Bench to scale. Scale to circular drawer. Drawer to witness board. Witness board to cage shelf. Shelf to dispatch side. Dispatch side to bagging table. Then back again in fragments, each interruption dragging some tool a little farther from where habit says it belongs. At the left edge of your board sits the pad used for district marks, darker and drier than the one for dates. The missing device would have touched it many times today. A trail does not remain in the air, but a worker's body remembers routes that paper never records. You start with the path your right hand would have taken. Ink pad, parcel, rack, ledger. Then perhaps, if interrupted, rack forgotten, device set briefly near the open circular while weight was checked, or on the witness board while the clerk answered the auditor, or on the edge of the cage shelf when a doubtful parcel was returned to movement. The more you think, the more possible places appear. This is the unpleasant arithmetic of misplaced tools. Each remembered action multiplies the search. The supervising clerk makes a choice then that steadies the room. No one is to stop ordinary dispatch preparation entirely. What can be tied, weighed, and labeled without that cancellation is to be made ready now. Only the corrected parcels needing final district mark will wait. It is a calm instruction, but it draws a line through the anxiety. The mail must still leave. Even a missing stamp does not earn the right to halt the whole office, so the room divides its labor. Some keep moving the sacks, some continue ledger closure. And you, because the absence belongs closest to your bench, search. You check beneath the folded rate tables. The edges are rough with constant use, and when you lift them, fine paper dust rises and settles on your cuffs. No stamp. You kneel and look under the bench itself. There are shoe marks in the dust, one dropped pencil stub, a bent paper clip, and a bead of sealing wax hardened into a dark red tear. No stamp. At the bagging table, the porter unties the mouth of one half-filled sack to inspect the bottom boards and the little gap between the slats where tools sometimes slide if set too near the edge. He finds only 2 loose labels and a strip of waxed twine. No stamp. The supervising clerk opens the circular drawer fully now, taking out not just the latest notices, but the stack beneath. Old forms, superseded addenda, a blunt knife for cutting string, and a reserve pad gone nearly dry. No stamp. In rooms made of routines, absence becomes a strangely physical thing. You can feel where the missing object ought to be, the way a tongue feels the place of a lost tooth. The empty slot in the rack seems to keep drawing the eye back to itself. It is not just that a tool is gone, it is that the bench's order has been altered, and order is what lets every hand move without fresh thought each minute. The audit clerk's visit returns to everyone's mind, not because anyone suspects him of carrying it away, only because his inspection disrupted the familiar pattern. He lifted devices, he set them down, he asked to see the reserve drawer. At one point, you had 2 ledgers open at once, one parcel half notated, and the machine parts inquiry still fresh in memory. A stamp could vanish in a room like that without any person's negligence being dramatic enough to notice at the time. Bauer says, almost under his breath, that tools migrate toward paperwork on difficult days. He is right. An iron hand stamp does not truly migrate. Hands carry it. Still, it often ends up where paper pulled attention strongest. So you go to the supplementary fee sheet and check every page one by one, lifting corners. Nothing. You check the telegraph reply copy press. Nothing. You check the narrow ledge under the cage, where parcels awaiting return instructions are sometimes stacked too high. There, at least, you find a trail of smudged black where some device was set with wet ink earlier, but the ledge is empty now. That feels almost worse than nothing. A mark without the tool, evidence that it passed this way and kept going. The supervising clerk asks whether the reserve district cancellation is serviceable. You open the lower drawer again and lift it from its place. The handle is older, smoother from years of use, and wrapped near the ferrule with a neat wire repair. It is not ideal. The lettering face belongs to a previous issue, though still recognizable to any clerk who has handled parcels for long. Its impression strikes a touch narrower than the current device. The date line sits a little higher. A careful eye would notice at once. An ordinary receiving office would notice too, though whether they would object depends on workload, memory, and mood. The clerk weighs this in silence. Using the reserve stamp would keep dispatch on schedule. It would also create a visible inconsistency in the corrected parcels, precisely the kind of thing that later becomes a question. He tests the older device on waste paper. The impression comes out light at first. He re-inks, presses again, and this time the letters read clearly enough. Bauer leans over to look. Recognizable, he says. Not beautiful. That may be the best any room can ask at such an hour. Still, the supervising clerk does not decide immediately. First, he wants one more full search. Not because hope is high, but because the correct tool deserves one more chance to be found before the office deliberately creates a discrepancy. You retrace the parcels that most likely took the device farthest from its home. The machine parts consignments were examined under witness. Perhaps the district mark was carried there for final closure and left among the paper strips. You search beneath the wrapper scraps, between the boards, under the string spool. Nothing. Then the morning's unusual bundle. One of those parcels was moved to the separate conditional tray, another to the dispatch side early. A third returned from correction to weighing. You inspect the trays themselves, lifting every parcel not yet bagged, checking for a stamp hidden under a label flap or caught beneath a folded wrapper edge. No stamp. At the inquiry shelf, where telegraph copies and answer slips collect until the end of the shift, the woman with the district guides finds a dark rectangular smudge on a docket and holds it up hopefully. It is only the imprint left by some other device, set down on damp paper. Again, a ghost of use without the object. The porter finally checks his own apron pockets, embarrassed though no one asked him to. From one pocket comes a weight ticket, from another, 2 sealing wafers and a bent nail. No stamp. The search has now taken enough minutes that dispatch begins to press more sharply at the edges of the room. You can hear it in the change of sounds. More sacks dragged into place. More route labels called out. The far door opening and shutting for messengers between sorting and loading. The kind of work that can absorb delay all morning becomes less forgiving as evening leans in. The clerk makes his decision. Use the reserve district stamp on all corrected parcels still requiring closure. Annotate every affected ledger line. Add a note to the dispatch memorandum that reserve device used owing to current tool missing a bench. Impression variant known. He speaks evenly. Once the instruction is said aloud, it stops being a worry and becomes work. That is one mercy of bureaucratic rooms. A problem named and entered is lighter than a problem hovering without form. You set the reserve device beside the darker pad. Its handle feels different in the hand, less balanced, with a tiny looseness where the repair wire holds. The face, when inked, takes more care. Too little pressure, and the lower letters fade. Too much, and the line spreads. You practice twice on waste paper, then once more. By the third strike, your wrist has adjusted. The first corrected parcel lies before you, the narrow brown one from the morning bundle. Its wrapper already carries the crossed obsolete routing, the manuscript district note, and your earlier processing marks. Now it will also carry an older style of final district cancellation. You place it carefully in the remaining open space. The reserve stamp comes down. The impression is plain. Not elegant, not quite matching the others already dispatched today, but plain and readable and dark enough to travel. You add the ledger note at once, before another interruption can break the chain. Reserve district device used in lieu of current bench cancel, impression variant. The words feel longer than they should. Still, each one earns its place. The second parcel takes the mark more cleanly. The third, a cloth-wrapped one from the later doubtful tray, drinks the ink into its weave and softens the edges. You note that too, not because cloth always softens impressions, only because with a reserve device in play, even ordinary material behavior begins to look like part of the record. This is how quiet officers create their own archaeology. One small irregularity makes every surrounding detail worthy of notation. The supervising clerk checks each line after you write it. No flourish. No criticism. Only the sober attention of a man who knows tomorrow may bring a question from another station, and he would rather answer with a page already clear. At the bagging table, the porter keeps the relevant sacks open while waiting for the corrected parcels to be released. He does not complain, though keeping sacks open is awkward work. A tied sack is finished thought. An open one is a thought still requiring care. Route labels can be misplaced. Contents can be confused. The mouth of the bag always seems to collapse just when both hands are busy. He stands with one boot against the sack's base and the tie cord looped in readiness, patient as a ferryman at a narrow crossing. As you continue striking the reserve device, you notice something quietly useful. Because the handle is older, you must pay closer attention to every motion. There is no room for automatic force. Each impression asks to be guided. In that way, the missing proper stamp changes not just the look of the parcels, but the speed of your own hand. A routine motion becomes once again a deliberate one. Sometimes tools wear habits into workers. Sometimes the wrong tool makes the work visible again. The dispatch memorandum is opened on the side table. The supervising clerk dictates while Bauer writes. Several corrected parcels closed with reserve district device due to current bench cancel unlocated at evening dispatch. All lines annotated. No interruption to dispatch. That final phrase matters almost more than the rest. No interruption to dispatch. It is the office defending itself preemptively, not hiding the irregularity, not dramatizing it, just setting it in proportion. The mail still moved. That is the answer institutions often value most. A messenger from the loading entrance appears to ask whether the railway sacks for the Western Line will be ready in time. The porter says yes without looking up. The answer is not yet certain, but it becomes more certain by being spoken. This is another kind of working judgment, not prediction exactly, commitment. The corrected parcels pass from your hand to the bagging table one by one. Each is checked against the open route list, then lowered into the proper sack. The porter does not drop them. Parcel post is rarely treated with ceremonial tenderness, but neither is it casually flung when documentation has been troublesome all day. A difficult wrapper earns a little extra respect at dispatch. The sacks begin to fill. Thick canvas sides bulge outward with the shape of boxes, bundles, and tied flat packets. The sounds change again. No longer the light, frequent thud of bench sorting, but the heavier, muffled settling of goods entering deep canvas. A tied sack sounds different from a loose pile. Contained, directed. Almost calm. Then comes the first consequence of the reserve device, and it arrives at once, before the sacks are even sealed. A junior clerk from the far bench, helping with route check, notices the impression style on one corrected parcel and asks whether it belongs to the right district. He does not ask suspiciously, only carefully. That is exactly the kind of question a receiving office may ask tomorrow. The supervising clerk answers with equal care. Reserve device, bench annotation complete. Enter no objection. The junior clerk nods and continues. Yet the exchange confirms the point. The difference is visible, not just to an auditor with a portfolio, but to any clerk who has seen enough post to trust his eyes. The inconsistency will travel with the parcels as surely as the sacks do. You finish the last corrected item requiring district closure and wipe the reserve device face with a scrap of rag. Its metal edge leaves a dark crescent on the cloth. For a moment you almost place it in the empty slot of the regular rack. Then you stop and return it to the reserve drawer where it belongs. That small act feels strangely solemn. A substitute has done its work. The original absence remains. The missing proper device is entered in the tool notebook. Not stolen, not broken, unlocated at close of dispatch preparation. That wording too matters. Not stolen implies inquiry and blame. Not broken implies pieces or witness. Unlocated leaves the matter suspended, practical rather than accusatory. Tools have a status almost like parcels. Accepted, held, redirected, not yet resolved. The sacks are tied at last. This is satisfying work to watch, and perhaps even more satisfying after a day of provisional judgments. The porter gathers the canvas mouth, twists it, threads the cord, and pulls hard until the neck narrows under his hands. A lead seal is fixed. The route label is checked again. Then the sack is stood upright, with a final shove of the knee. Finished. Another beside it. Then another. The corrected parcels are now inside with all the rest, their visible peculiarities hidden in canvas and cord. Only the memorandum, the ledger notes, and the impressions on their wrappers remain to carry the story forward. The loading men take the first sacks, boot heels on boards. Canvas brushing the doorframe. A cold draft enters with each opening of the loading entrance. Outside, wheels and distant calls from the yard drift in, softened by stone and evening air. Inside, the bench begins to look less like a place of decision and more like a place after decisions. Loose string ends, pads with their lids left askew, a cup ring on the circular, a little scatter of labels that no longer need anyone's attention tonight. Yet the missing device keeps the day from settling fully. After the first batch of sacks goes, the supervising clerk makes one more circuit of the room. He checks the bagging table again, the witness board, the shelf beside the cage, the space behind the circular drawer. Then, as if obeying some old instinct, he inspects the folds of the waste paper sack where spoiled forms and wrapper scraps were dropped all afternoon. He finds nothing useful there except two half-legible address strips and a stained packing slip. Still, the effort matters. If the tool does not reappear tonight, everyone will want to know it was looked for properly, while the movements of the day were still warm in memory. You search your own movements again. The reserve device, now safely back in the drawer, makes the regular slot look emptier than before. You remember the audit clerk lifting the reserve rack. You remember yourself writing the machine parts lines. You remember the cloth parcel at the window. You remember the telegraph runner, the supplementary fee sheet, the question over the provincial station name. All of it is clear. What is not clear is the actual leaving of the tool from your hand. That missing moment is exactly the kind that vanishes in repetitive work. Not because the work is mindless, because it is full. A hand can do 6 exact things in 1 minute, each ordinary enough not to demand private remembrance. Then one of them matters later, and there is no bright thread tied around it in memory. Bauer says the stamp may turn up tomorrow in some absurdly sensible place, inside a folded rate board, behind the blotter press, under a stack of blank registry cards lifted only at opening. He has seen stranger returns, he says. A scale weight once travelled for 2 days in the pocket of a clerk's coat before being found while he paid for tobacco. No one laughs much, but the story softens the room by half a degree. There is comfort in knowing that disorder often has humbler causes than fear first suggests. The last dispatch sacks go out. With them goes the practical urgency of the missing tool. Not the administrative one, that remains. But the train connection has been met. The corrected parcels are on their way. The reserve impressions have entered the stream. Tomorrow, some receiving clerk may pause over them, or may not. And because they may not, most of the day's labour is already beginning to disappear, even before the ink on the ledger has fully dried. That is the ordinary fate of successful postal work. A parcel arrives, a fee is collected, a receipt is signed, and the little chain of judgment behind it settles into silence. If nothing breaks, if nothing is returned, if no one writes a complaint in a clean official hand, then the bench that corrected the trouble is allowed to become invisible again. You begin to see this the next morning. The room is cold first, as always. The stove has not yet done its work, and the boards underfoot still hold the night's hardness. Your bench looks smaller after yesterday's confusion, not because it has changed, but because the trays are empty again, the rate circulars stacked squarely, the inkwell capped, the string spool set where it belongs. The absence of trouble makes every object seem more modest. The missing district cancel is found before the first sack is opened, not in a dramatic place, not hidden in any ingenious gap. It is lying flat inside the folded cover of the supplementary fee book, where it must have been set down while someone copied line references and then closed over by paper. When you lift the book and hear the little metal tap against wood, the sound is almost embarrassingly simple. Bauer nods as if this proves a theory he has held for years. Tools do not vanish, he says. They rest where paperwork has persuaded them to rest. The supervising clerk examines the handle, the face, the drying ring of old ink near the base. No damage. No bent stem, only one iron device carried, by interruption and ordinary human hands, into the wrong layer of paper. He enters its recovery in the tool notebook with the same calm hand that entered its absence. Unlocated at close of dispatch, recovered at opening within supplementary fee register. Nothing more, no reprimand, no speech. A problem appears. A line is written. A problem ceases to exist. In offices like this, that is often as close to forgiveness as things need to come. Then the first replies from yesterday begin to return. Not all at once, not as a grand reckoning, just as small pieces of administrative weather arriving from different directions. A telegraph acknowledgement from the receiving station handling the machine parts. Deficiency noted, their report, release pending collection from consignee. That means your boxed hand stamp has been accepted. The amount was readable, the route was clear enough. The parcels were not thrown back into doubt. A little later comes a district memo regarding one of the mixed franked cloth parcels. Old branch station wording accepted this time, not to be repeated on future traffic. The phrase carries exactly the tone one would expect, a mild scolding addressed mostly to the future. Yet hidden inside it is a kind of approval, accepted this time. That is how systems absorb irregularity when they do not wish to admit how often they must. By noon, there is already proof that several of yesterday's doubtful items have entered ordinary life again. One collected fee posted in the cash summary, one returned receipt stub stamped at destination, one notation from a provincial office that the corrected district route was understood. Each item closes a tiny gap. Each one says, in effect, that the parcel system has taken in the disturbance and made it look almost normal from the outside. That is where the irony of your work begins to settle. You mattered yesterday because things were untidy. You matter less today because the untidiness has been made to resemble routine. If you had failed, people far away might have noticed. Because you did not fail, they notice almost nothing. There is a dignity in that, though it is a quiet one. The bench clerks who keep systems from stumbling are often easiest to forget because the evidence of their success is so unremarkable. A parcel delivered one day later than hoped, but still near enough to ordinary. A fee collected with a grumble, then paid. A route corrected before the customer ever knows there had been another possible route at all. You think of the machine parts workshop. Somewhere outside Berlin, a consignee signs for the boxes and pays the deficiency. He may curse the extra amount. He may complain that rates change too often. He may blame the sender, or the post, or the condition of the times. Then he opens the wrappers, takes out the parts, and continuation is what your bench bought him. Not perfection, continuation. There are more of these traces through the week. A brown envelope from a district office contains 3 corrected acknowledgement slips tied with red thread. The slips are thin and slightly rough, each bearing a destination mark, a date, and a note that supplementary postage was either collected or waived within local tolerance. One of the parcels from the first doubtful bundle was delivered with no issue at all. The sender's underpayment proved so minor against the latest circular confusion that the receiving clerk simply let it pass. Another required destination collection, exactly as your notation suggested. A third was redirected once more, then reached its final depot under the handwritten district correction you applied. No one writes to praise such things. Why would they? To the officers downstream, there are only packets moving under marks that made sufficient sense. But each slip is a tiny confirmation that yesterday's bench judgments traveled and held. At the public counter, none of this is visible. A woman asks whether preserves still require extra wrapping. A clerk from a leather concern disputes a fee line by 3 pfennigs. A shop runner arrives with ordinary parcels tied too tightly at the corners. The work begins again. Yet now you carry a day's worth of proof that the post survives, not on ideal forms, but on chains of clerks willing to interpret imperfect paper kindly enough to keep goods moving. The supervising clerk says almost nothing about yesterday. Still, his way of assigning the morning's doubtful pieces shifts a little. One blurred route label goes directly to your side of the bench instead of his. A declared value discrepancy is left in your tray with only a penciled note to verify against the circular. A machine sample package with a broken old surcharge mark is set near your ledger rather than Bowers. This is not promotion. Nothing as formal as that. It is a transfer of trust, measured in small objects. In old offices, authority often arrives before title does. Someone has seen how you write a note, how you place a strike, how you remember order under pressure. After that, parcels begin to find their way toward you. The missing device also leaves a faint afterlife, not in punishment, in caution. For several days, every tool goes back to its exact place with a little more ceremony than before. You wipe the district cancel before racking it. You check the reserve drawer is fully shut. You never again leave the supplementary fee book closed over loose iron. The room has learned from one absence. That, too, is how administrative craft accumulates. Not in grand reform, but in habits adjusted by small embarrassments. The auditor's notebook produces one more consequence. A district instruction arrives, typed and uneven at the margins, directing officers still awaiting new deficiency devices to annotate corrective parcel acceptance more fully in ledger and dispatch memorandum. No fresh tools yet, no great supply miracle, only more words required where iron has not caught up. Bauer reads this and makes a noise in his throat that could mean amusement or fatigue. Paper, he says, always arrives faster than metal. He is right. Forms can be ordered. Circulars can be typed. But a hand stamp must be designed, manufactured, shipped, entered, issued, and then taught into use. So in the meantime, clerks write more. That is one of the hidden histories of the Weimar Post. People think first of stamps and inflation, of denominations racing upward, of colorful sheets covered in impossible numbers. Those things are real enough, but beneath them lies another history, quieter and less photographed, the history of annotation, of notes squeezed into margins because the printed line no longer says enough, of older devices used with newer explanations, of ledgers thickening as systems try to explain in handwriting what their official tools cannot yet express. Parcel post feels this more than letter mail. A letter can carry confusion and still slip onward because it weighs little and asks little. A parcel has bulk. It takes space in sacks, shelves, carts, and cages. Its payment is layered. Its route matters physically. A misunderstanding in letter post can disappear into volume. A misunderstanding in parcel post sits on wood and demands room. That is why jobs like yours once mattered so much. You were not merely marking paper. You were deciding whether uncertainty would remain small enough to travel. As the weeks pass, some of yesterday's exact troubles fade into regular procedure. Mixed franking remains common. Old wrappers continue to circulate beneath new labels. Commercial firms still use up forms printed for rates already gone. No one expects tidiness anymore. What changes is the bench's skill at absorbing it. A parcel arrives with old imperial stationery under a Weimar overlabel, and you hardly pause before checking weight, zone, declared value, and local tolerance. A district slip names a depot no longer current, and your pen crosses it with one clean line, while the receiving station name is entered above. A declared amount differs from the stub by a narrow margin, and you already know when such a thing may continue and when it must go behind the gate. This is the craft becoming internal, less visible, more fluent. The work does not become simpler. You become more able to carry its shifting parts without showing strain. There is no badge for that, no public understanding of it. Only the satisfaction of a bench that stays in motion, and motion is what the post values most. Years later, if one looked only at ministry papers, one might think these unstable tariff years were solved by circular after circular, by official language gradually catching reality. That is partly true. Rates did settle for a time. Devices were replaced, forms were redesigned, instructions became less contradictory than they had been in the worst months. But that paper story leaves out the human middle. It leaves out the bench clerks who, during the unsettled period, held together the gap between obsolete wrappers and current fees. It leaves out the half-legal practices that were tolerated because they worked. It leaves out the old device kept in the drawer because recognizable wording mattered more than perfect wording when sacks had to leave by evening. The parcel post stamper belongs exactly in that middle. Too minor for headlines, too practical for memoir, too routine for most history, and yet for a few years, central in ways the grander offices could not be. You can feel this when you handle old parcel labels, not just yesterday's, but the ones kept in the file bundles that line the back cabinet. Rejected examples, inquiry cases, training specimens no one has thrown away because they might still teach a younger clerk what bad wrapping looks like or how a blurred station mark can mislead an entire route. The labels are worn now, paste stained dark, twine grooves pressed into the paper, ink strikes layered one atop another, some sharp, some feathered by damp. Senders and destinations remain readable because those are the pieces archives tend to care about. But what often disappears first is the bench hand, the anonymous correcting note, the practical strike, the iron pressure that turned doubtful goods into accepted traffic. Historians, when they come much later, will often notice the parcel because it names a workshop, a merchant, a district, a commodity. They will study trade, geography, inflation, politics, all important things. But the little box deficiency mark may seem merely incidental. The manuscript district correction may look like clutter. The reserve impression with its older lettering may pass for an accident. Only someone who has stood at the bench would know that these are the signs of the job itself. This forgetting is not cruel, it is structural. Systems record what they are built to preserve. Sender, address, fee, dispatch, receipt. The individual hand inside the process survives only in fragments, unless there is scandal, theft, or some larger event dramatic enough to drag the bench into view. And because most parcel stampers succeeded precisely by preventing drama, they left behind little that announces them. A worn handle, a notation style, a habit of abbreviation shared across a district office for 20 years. That may be all. The broader machinery changes too, of course. As the 20s move on and then give way to later regimes and later reorganizations, parcel work does not remain exactly this intimate craft. Rate reforms continue. Accounting grows stricter. More standardized devices arrive. Office structures become more formal. Certain local tolerances that once lived by memory are either absorbed into printed rules or stamped out by them. A bench clerk's freedom to interpret narrows in some areas and deepens in others. Then mechanization begins to press at the edges. Not everywhere, not at once, but enough. Hand cancellation does not vanish overnight, especially not for awkward goods and special handling. Still, the dream of administration is always to reduce variation, to make every mark identical, every line legible, every route predetermined. From a distance, that sounds efficient. Often it is. It also means that older forms of skill become harder to notice because the worker no longer has to improvise as visibly. The parcel post stamper of the rough Weimar years needed to read material clues almost like a second language. Twine tension, ink age, wrapper reuse, district naming habits, the tone of a sender's haste in the slant of figures. Later systems, better standardized, ask somewhat less of that eye. Not because the work stops mattering, because more of the judgment has been moved upward into forms, tables, and mechanical procedure. There is relief in that. There is loss too. A narrow craft dissolves when the world around it stops requiring exactly that narrowness. And when crafts dissolve quietly, memory usually keeps the machinery and forgets the person. Think of how many postal objects survive in museums and archives. Bright stamps under glass, uniform caps, mail bags with district lettering, telegraph instruments, sorting cases, even old seals and scales. But the parcel stamper's exact bench, with its little habits of placement and annotation, is harder to preserve. The tools look plain, the motions look repetitive. The significance lies not in the beauty of the object, but in the practice sequence joining object to paper. Without the worker, the hand stamp is only iron and wood. With the worker, for a moment, it becomes the authority that decides whether a crate of machine parts reaches a workshop by tomorrow. That is harder to exhibit, easier to forget. Sometimes you can see the vanishing happen in real time. A younger clerk joins the room and learns the current deficiency wording, the current tariff, the current district list. He does not need to know all the superseded forms because the office has finally cleared most of them. He never develops the reflex Bauer has for old circular dates because those dates no longer control today's confusion. He can process more parcels faster, with fewer local explanations. That is progress by one measure. It also means the memory of the awkward middle years starts to thin. Within a decade, perhaps less, the peculiar expertise of recognizing three conflicting route marks on one wrapper and turning them into one acceptable line may already seem old-fashioned. Within another decade, fewer still remember why the reserve drawer held obsolete tools. Then a generation passes. Then another. The parcel arrives in an archive without its bench context, and all anyone can say for certain is where it started and where it went. Even the word stamper feels too small to carry the actual work. It sounds like a man who merely pressed an object down. But the role included sorting, judging, tolerating, correcting, and recording. The strike was only the visible end of a chain of thought. Still, officers often named jobs by their most obvious motion: sorter, clerk, stamping hand, packer, bagger. The modest title helped hide the complexity. Perhaps that is another reason nobody remembers the Weimar Parcel Post stamper. The name itself undersells the labor, and yet the daily life of the job was never grand. It remained a life of benches, cuffs polished at the edge by wood, and fingers roughened by paper. Morning cold in the tin of the inkwell. Midday bread eaten near the ledger because there was no point stepping away while the doubtful tray remained high. The smell of twine and dust and cheap wool steaming dry by the stove. The quiet satisfaction of a clean strike. The slight irritation when a sender tied knots too decorative to untangle properly under witness. The way you learned, without planning to, which commercial firms packed honestly and which sent parcels just one layer of paper thinner than prudence recommended. These things do not make monuments. They make texture. And texture is often the first casualty when history is summarized. The office itself keeps very little sentiment, that is worth saying. Postal rooms are not built to cherish their own memories. They are built to clear surfaces for tomorrow. At the end of each shift, the blotters are shaken, the forms stacked, the pads closed, the wrappers discarded, the accepted parcels gone. What remains are ledgers and a few held items in the cage. Even unusual days are flattened quickly into line entries. Deficiency collected, rerouted, delivered, returned to sender. No one writes, on the official page, that the district guide was wrong in 3 overlapping ways, and Bauer remembered a railway note from memory. No one records the half-minute of silence before the reserve device was chosen. No one enters the texture of the cloth wrapper that swallowed the ink at the edges. Those details live only in the workers' bodies and vanish as workers leave. Sometimes, while tying old file bundles, you catch yourself reading the past in these compressed office remains. A ledger abbreviation from 5 years earlier in a hand you no longer see at any bench. A district notation style that belonged to a clerk transferred long ago. A question mark added beside a fee line so small that only the person who wrote it would know what hesitation it marked. There are many ghosts in administrative writing, but they are quiet ghosts. They do not ask to be named. They simply persist as habits in ink. The parcel system goes on, of course. That is the final irony. It always goes on. Governments change, tariffs rise and are revised. Devices are replaced, the names on office doors alter, yet sacks are still tied and labels still read. Goods still move because someone at a bench decides they can move. The individual worker is replaceable in one sense. Another pair of hands can be trained. Another clerk can learn the forms. And yet the functioning of the whole depends at every point on there being some particular person there that day, in that hour, willing and able to make the narrow decision. That is a humble kind of indispensability, real while it lasts, invisible once it has passed. By the time years have gone by, what survives of the parcel post stamper may be only this: a few worn cancellors in a drawer, a reserve device with repaired wire around the handle, some ledgers with cramped supplementary entries during months of unstable rates. A parcel label in an archive bearing two district names, one crossed through, and a box deficiency mark that tells a specialist more than it tells anyone else. Perhaps an auditor's notebook with a line about recognizable continuity. Perhaps a cash summary proving the deficiency was collected. From these scraps, one can reconstruct the outline of the work: a room, a bench, a worker who was trusted enough to write where the printed form no longer sufficed. Not a hero, not a victim, just a person in a narrow role that mattered intensely whenever disorder threatened to sit down and stay. And most of the time, because the role did its work, disorder did not stay. It was stamped, tied, corrected, and sent onward until it became someone else's ordinary parcel. That is why memory slips past the worker so easily. The network keeps the parcel because the parcel had to arrive. It keeps the fee because the accounts had to close. It keeps the route because administrations love routes. But it does not keep, except by accident, the living feel of the hand that brought the stamp down squarely and turned uncertainty into passage. Even the phrase passage may be too large. A better word might be continuance, because that is what the parcel stamper really served. Not glory, and not even strict correctness every time, but continuance. A workshop kept working, a merchant got his samples, a provincial customer signed a receipt and cut the string. The world remained joined together by paper, twine, iron, and habit. And when that joining held, the hand at the bench dissolved back into the room. You can trace that dissolving in the records if you know what to look for. The ledgers from unstable months are dense with supplementary marks. Then, slowly, they thin. The margin notes shorten. The older deficiency wording appears less often. Mixed franking still turns up, but not with the same wild mixture of emergency improvisation. District corrections become more regular. The reserve drawer is opened less. The very signs that once proved the stamper's value begin to fade because the system has become better at hiding its own strain. That is the cruel little reward of maintenance work. The better you do it, the less visible you become. By the later years, a younger official could easily look back and imagine that the transition had been mostly administrative. A rate was changed. A notice was issued. A device was replaced, traffic adjusted, but lived from bench height. It was never that smooth. It was carried day after day by clerks who made old paper answer new rules long enough for the new rules to become ordinary. Without them, the paper reform would have remained only paper. This is why the parcel post stamper is so easy to lose from memory. He leaves behind effects, not stories, no dramatic rescue, no celebrated invention. Just parcels that arrived close enough to on time to avoid becoming tales of delay. History tends to keep the loud interruptions. Routine workers vanish into the fact that the interruption did not spread. Still, the archives leak a little. A blurred wrapper in a provincial file may show a boxed deficiency struck with too much ink, and beside it, a manuscript note correcting a route no printed form had yet caught up with. A dispatch memorandum may mention the temporary use of a reserve device because the current bench cancel was unavailable at close of evening bagging. A district instruction may refer, in that dry administrative way, to the continued use of older hand stamps, pending delivery of revised tools. Such lines are not meant to preserve a person. Yet a person is there. You can feel him in the exactness of the notation, in the decision to write just enough and not too much, in the way the mark avoids the sender's line while still remaining legible to the next office. These are not the traces of a machine. They are the traces of practiced restraint. And there is another reason nobody remembers the Weimar Parcel post stamper. The Weimar years themselves are remembered for larger instabilities. Money rushing out of value. Governments shifting. Streets full of argument. Those broad events are real, and they deserve their place. But they cast a long shadow. Under that shadow, smaller kinds of labor disappear. The clerk at the parcel bench does not fit the grand summaries. He is too still, too exact, too tied to the ordinary exchange of useful things. Yet broad instability is lived through little routines as much as through speeches and headlines. Somebody still has to weigh the parcel. Somebody still has to read the faded district slip. Somebody still has to decide whether underpayment is small enough to move forward and be corrected later. That somebody is part of history too, even if history rarely says so aloud. You might think the disappearance of the roll happened all at once, with some machine replacing the hand stamp and the whole old craft ending in a clean administrative stroke. But work like this usually fades by thinning. A new device here, a revised procedure there. One class of parcel standardized, one local exception abolished. One office reorganized so that a judgment once made at bench height is now made by a printed table before the parcel reaches the room. Nothing theatrical. Just fewer moments requiring exactly this kind of eye. Then, one day, the younger clerk no longer learns the old tolerances at all. He learns the current scheme and trusts it. He may never need to judge reused imperial forms under emergency surcharge markings because such paper has at last disappeared from circulation. He may never need to read 3 district names layered on one wrapper because the routing slips are now better controlled. He may stamp, certainly, but he does not stamp in quite the same world. That is enough to end a craft without anybody announcing a funeral. If you have ever handled an old office tool, you may know the feeling. The object survives. The use has thinned away from it. A hand stamp sits in a drawer, solid as ever. The wood handle worn smooth where a thumb rested for years. Nothing about it looks tragic. It is not broken. It is simply no longer necessary in the same way. That is how the parcel stamper slips into obscurity. His tools outlive his exact skill just long enough to become curiosities. And once a tool becomes a curiosity, the habits that made it vital are hard to reconstruct. Even the surviving wrappers can be deceptive. They look messy, crossed lines, overstamps, corrective notes in cramped ink. To someone outside the work, it can all seem like bureaucratic clutter. But from inside the process, every layer meant something practical. This line was crossed so the parcel would not be sent to the dead depot. This fee note was added so the receiving clerk could collect without writing back. This older cancellation was allowed to stand because every office on the route would still recognize it. The wrapper was not cluttered. It was translated from confusion into movement. And translation is another labor people forget once they can read the final version. There is a final, quieter consequence too, because the parcel stamper's success lay in making goods appear ordinary again. Even the recipients helped erase him. The workshop that received the machine parts did not preserve a memory of the Berlin bench that corrected their tariff trouble. They preserved the parts, or the invoice, or nothing at all. The merchant who paid a deficiency fee remembered the annoyance, perhaps, but not the clerk who had chosen acceptance over delay. The provincial office that read the obsolete station name and found your manuscript correction merely treated it as another day in the post. The whole chain encouraged forgetting because every link was trying to restore normality. The better the restoration, the less reason anyone had to think backward. So remembrance survives mostly in negative space. In the places where things almost did not continue, a parcel almost held, a route almost lost, a device almost absent at the wrong hour, a fee almost assessed in the wrong class. The stamper lived in those almosts. Not dramatically, steadily. He spent his days keeping small administrative uncertainties from hardening into real interruptions. That kind of work is harder to honor because it leaves behind no clear before and after, only a middle that did not collapse. By evening, in the old room, this would have felt less philosophical than it sounds. It would have felt like wiping the stamp face clean, closing the inkwell, straightening the latest circular under the blotter so its corner would not curl overnight, checking the cage shelf one last time for any parcel that had slipped behind the others, running a finger down the ledger margin to see if any line lacked its closure mark. The room, after dispatch, always became simpler. Not empty exactly, just reduced to what still needed tomorrow. That too was part of the comfort of the job. No matter how complicated the day had been, the bench could be restored to order before you left. Not perfect order, never that, but enough. The doubtful tray reduced, the reserve drawer shut, the proper device back in its slot, the unresolved cases named and shelved. There is peace in named unfinished work. It does not tug at the mind in the same way. And perhaps that is the last thing worth keeping with this forgotten occupation. Not only that it was specific and historical and tied to a narrow moment in Weimar postal confusion, but that it offered a very old human satisfaction. You met what arrived. You sorted what could move from what could not yet move. You made a mark that meant something to strangers. You left a page clearer than you found it. For many workers in many centuries, that has been enough to build a life around. A modest life, certainly. Not one likely to be written about. Yet the steadiness of whole systems has often depended on lives exactly that modest. In the quiet after dispatch, if you stood near the window, you might still hear the yard, a cartwheel, a call at the loading door, the muffled labor of sacks being set into place for the rail journey ahead. But inside, the room would be settling, the stove ticking as its heat eased, the smell of ink turning duller as the pads were closed. A few string fibers left on the boards, catching the last poor light. The hand stamp, at rest now, looked smaller than it had in use. That is another trick of tools. In the hand, they carry authority. On the bench, they become ordinary objects again. A lump of iron, a turned wooden handle, a face cut with words that only matter when pressed into service. Perhaps that is fitting. The parcel stamper was much the same, ordinary until work required him, authoritative only inside the narrow field of his bench. Then, once the need passed, almost indistinguishable from the room around him. No monument follows that kind of labor, no portrait usually. Only habits passed for a while from one worker to another, and then not even that. Still, if you look closely at surviving parcel paper from those years, you can sometimes sense the room returning, a Berlin mark struck square despite bad wrapping. A deficiency note fitted neatly into a margin already crowded by older confusion. A route correction written in the hand of someone who knew that another clerk, further down the line, would need just enough help and no more. These are small signs, but small signs are what this work was made of. And in a world that often remembers the speeches of an age more readily than its daily repairs, the small signs may be the kinder record. The parcels went on. That is really the whole answer. They went on through inflation, through revised fees, through obsolete stationery, through audits, through missing tools, through clerks making practical judgments under thin light and tired eyes. They went on because someone at a bench kept making them go on. Not elegantly every time, not according to the latest wording every time, but legibly, reliably enough, humanly enough. And when later decades cleaned up the procedures, improved the forms, replaced the devices, and forgot the awkward middle years, they inherited a continuity built by people who had worked without the promise of being remembered. That may be why the title of the job sounds so plain. Parcel Post Stamper, a name that hides more than it reveals. But plain names often belong to indispensable work. They do not ask admiration, they ask only the chance to continue tomorrow. So the memory fades, the bench is reassigned, the tools are updated, or retired, or lost in a drawer. The ledger abbreviations stop meaning what they once meant. An archive keeps the wrapper, but not the temperature of the room. It keeps the strike, but not the pressure in the wrist. It keeps the fee, but not the little pause before acceptance. And because the room itself was built each day to clear and begin again, it leaves very little behind that insists on being seen. Only this faint outline. A worker in early morning cold, a heavy stamp dark with ink, a row of parcels tied in grey twine. A day when old labels and new rules overlapped just enough to require patience. A quiet sequence of judgments, a corrected dispatch. Then evening. Then another morning. The workshop is quiet now. The circular lies flat. The string spool has stopped rolling. The cage holds only what can wait. The hand stamp is back where it belongs. And somewhere far down the line, on paper already handled by other hands, an old impression is drying into the kind of ordinary mark that lets everything else continue. Most of those marks are unread now. Some were blurred by damp, some were cut away with the wrapper, some sit in files no one opens. But for a little while, in one Berlin sorting room, they were enough. And the room, when the work was done, returned to its own calm way of forgetting. The boards cooled, the ink thickened in the pad, the last ledger line waited under the lamp.